Hello and welcome back to Microsoft's Flight Simulator. Thank you very much for joining me in today's video. First off, I do apologise for this review being a little bit late. I was intending to do this 2 weeks ago, but I was unwell, and then for the most part it wasn't so much being unwell that stopped it, but it was the very blocked nose, of which I still have a little bit, and the cough that I definitely have, but it seems to have been a little bit better today, so I'm just trying to take advantage of a sort of a bit of a respite and get one of these videos done. Today, and indeed over the next few videos, I'm going to be taking a look at this. This is the Hawk T1A Advanced Trainer for Microsoft Flight Simulator by Just Flight. Available on the Just Flight website and the Microsoft Store Marketplace, or the Microsoft Flight Simulator Marketplace. It costs £32.99, and let me tell you, with the practice that I've done and some of the information that I've gathered by taking this aircraft out for a flight, and some of my just testing that I've done on this particular aircraft, this aircraft is absolutely brilliant. But don't just take my word for it. Make sure you stay tuned, because in this video I'm going to be going through the specifications for the aircraft. We're going to be taking a look at the detailed description for this aircraft. We're also going to be taking a look at a cockpit tour of this aircraft, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about the detail that Just Flight have put into this aircraft. So we're going to be spending this entire video on the ground. In the next video, I'm going to be starting the aircraft up, taxi, takeoff, and getting to fly the aircraft, see what it is like to fly. This camera is going a little bit wonky, so I'll straighten it. I'm trying to recreate the way I do the intros in X-Plane, but unfortunately it's a little bit different in Microsoft Flight Simulator. But anyway, that aside, in the next video, as I said, I will take the aircraft off, I will give it a bit of a flight, let's see what it's like, and then in the third part I will actually be putting this through its paces, really pushing this aircraft and seeing what it is capable of, and if I can fly it in the way the red arrows do. So make sure you stay tuned for parts 1, 2 and 3, but definitely stay tuned for this part, because I really want to highlight the detail that Just Flight have put into this particular aircraft. If I remember, I'll have these all timestamped, so if you want to jump ahead, please do go take a look at the timestamps in the description, and you'll be able to jump to whichever parts you want to see. Right, just thought I would take a closer look at this aircraft whilst I talk about the system specs and whilst I talk about what is contained within this product. So first off, let's talk about system specifications. For this aircraft to be able to run on your computer, and yes, it is computer, it is not unfortunately Xbox compatible, so this is only for PC. You will require a copy of Microsoft Flight Simulator, whether that's standard, Deluxe or Premium Deluxe. It doesn't matter whether you got it on disc, whether it's from the Microsoft Store, or whether it is on Steam. All three of them will work. I'll go through recommended specs instead of minimum, because I believe that the minimum really would not work well for this aircraft, or indeed for Flight Simulator. So the recommended specs: processors, an Intel i5-8400 or an AMD Ryzen 5 1500X, 16 gigabytes of RAM. That's a really nice view of the aircraft. I'm going to have to take a photo of this aircraft at some point with that kind of angle. An NVIDIA GTX 970 or an AMD Radeon RX 590 graphics card. Windows 10, or I assume now Windows 11, but they haven't officially put the compatibility for Windows 11 there. Though if you are running on Windows 11, you should be able to run this, and 1 gigabyte of hard drive space. Of course, you're flying an aircraft, you also need a flight controller of some sort, throttle, joystick, whatever it is, a HOTAS system if you want, or a full yoke. You definitely need that to also be able to run or fly this aircraft to its maximum capabilities. So those are your system requirements. What do you get with this particular product. Is it just me or is it tilting once again? It is. Let me straighten that up. That's strange. I do wonder why it keeps tilting. Right, so what do you get for this? Let's go through the detailed description before we go through for a cockpit tour. So this is of course a Hawk T1. It's a British-built single-engine jet trainer, two-man tandem cockpit, first flown in 1974. These have been flying around since 1974 and they still fly to this day. In fact, over 900 examples of this aircraft have been built in more than 10 variants and sold to air forces in 18 countries, 174 I believe being sold to or being built for the Royal Air Force. Of course, we have the T1, the T1A, and this variant, which you see right in front of you, which is of course the world famous Red Arrows. They've been flying as these aircraft since 1979. I believe before that they had Gnats, I think, but I'm not 100% certain because I was not alive in 1979. But I'm fairly sure I've seen one of the old Air Force or Red Arrows aircraft, and I'm fairly sure it was a Gnat. So, in terms of modelling and cockpit sounds, liveries, and other features, let's go through the liveries. People tend to be quite interested in the liveries. By default, it comes with 14 paint schemes. So we have 3 Red Arrows paint schemes. This one, which is the 2021 paint scheme. There is a 2014 paint scheme, which I believe is the anniversary paint scheme, 50th anniversary paint scheme. There is the older RAF Red Arrows paint scheme, which the most noticeable part of that is on the tail. So it has a completely different looking tail. I do like these new tails, but I do, given that I've seen the old tails for a very, very, very long time, the old tails do still hold a place, I think. They still work. I think both of them look nice. And to be fair, having the British flag like that, in this way, it reminds me just a little bit more of, part of it anyway, reminds me a little bit of an inverse of the Speedbird tails, where it's red, white, blue, white, red. This is red, well, I suppose it, yeah, this is red, white, blue, white, red. I suppose it's the same thing. It's just a small section of it. In fact, if I just stop the rotation, just highlight that, if you just take that bit there, that's sort of your Speedbird, your British Airways flag on the tail, which is of course makes sense because it's British. Anyway, that's beside the point at this point in time. There are other Air Force ones, Royal Air Force ones. So you've got a camouflage scheme. There's a Welsh Dragon livery, which I believe is black with a Welsh Dragon, red Welsh Dragon on it. 92 Squadron as well, and some of the test school livery and the early trainer liveries. We also have one for the Finnish Air Force, one for the Indonesian Air Force, one for the Royal Saudi Air Force, and one for the Swiss Air Force. Also have a PSD file to make your own liveries if you so wish. In terms of the modelling, of course it's an accurately modelled Hawk T1 and T1A with extensive research materials and hands-on experience with the real aircraft. I mean, again, when it comes to modelling, Just Flight are phenomenal on the modelling they do. In fact, in this case, I believe they're using 8K textures, so it really does shine and it really does look great. And of course the normal mapping, you can just see the light scattering across the different rivets and the sort of looks like the metal slightly bent. It isn't a smooth metal surface, and they've really done a great job there making this look real while still keeping it very FPS friendly. So that is really important. There are lots of external animations. You can see I've got the hatch on the nose open, the canopy's open. There's actually a ram air turbine just in front of the fore of the fin, of the tail fin. So we will be seeing that in action when I do a test, probably in the next video where I start up the aircraft, and I will show you that ram air turbine. Of course, we've also got all the covers. You can just see the exhaust cover right there. We've got all the lighting, the correct reflections, PBR. You've got, what else do you have here? I mean, you've got the oh, that's one thing to mention before I forget. If you purchase this on the Microsoft Store, you will not get weaponry. they do have weaponry on this aircraft. At the moment, of course, the configuration is red arrows. We don't have weapons. You just have a diesel tank for smoke at the bottom, which is that pod that you see underneath. But you can select weaponry, but only if you purchase this from Just Flight. Personally, I think it's just worth it, just to make it look more realistic. If you're using the other variants, you want to have that on there, which is something that, of course, is not available on the Microsoft store, so just bear that in mind. There is ground services support, so marshaller and fuel truck, full support for Microsoft Flight Simulator visual icing effects, and there's lots of different things like the red arrows display smoke, which actually does work, engine and gas turbine starter exhaust haze and wingtip vortices, and all of that sort of stuff. Of course, we've got the configurable front and rear pilots, which you will see later on, if I remember. In the Red Arrows aircraft, they are wearing red flight suits, which is awesome. And again, just the standard things that you see here: chocks, tie downs, covers, and the like. So that is what we have on the outside. Now, for the inside, I'm not going to really talk much about the inside here, nor am I going to talk about the custom coded systems, because I'd like to talk about this slightly separately a little bit later on in this video. What I will do though is discuss sounds. So there are sounds. We have a next generation jet noise. The Hawk T1 features a high fidelity WY sound environment, which has been developed by Sim Acoustics. Now, I have flown this aircraft already, and it does sound really good. So they have 200 separate sound effects to provide accurate feedback to whatever you're doing. So you've got the Rolls-Royce jet noise for the engine. You've got the full startup soundtrack with the gas turbine starter. You've got jet sounds, distant jet sounds, which obviously if you want to do flybys, it will sound like the real thing. And everything has authentic audio, so for all the different switches, buttons, levers, and the electrical system, batteries, etc., you have everything that you're supposed to have, all the correct noises, as well as feedback as you mess around with control surfaces such as the flaps or the ailerons or the elevator or the air brakes. So you will hear that. In addition to that, they have dynamic airflow noise during maneuvering. Now, I haven't been pushing this aircraft, so I'm not 100% certain on this. And there is simulation of breaking the sound barrier, though honestly I thought this aircraft could not break the sound barrier, so I'm kind of tempted to try this. I wonder what would happen if I put this aircraft into a dive and made it break the sound barrier. And then of course there are custom damage effects for when things did not go as planned for sounds. So there you go. That's the modelling, the texturing on the outside, and the sounds covered. What I'm going to do now is jump inside, and I'm going to do a full cockpit tour so that you're very familiar with the cockpit, and then I'm going to do a little bit of talking about some of the features that this aircraft has, some of the systems and the depth of which Just Flight have gone into these particular systems to make sure that it has the most realistic feel, I suppose, and realistic immersion. Immersion realistic doesn't work. Just the most immersive experience that you can have in a flight simulator. Okay, so here we are inside the aircraft, and what I've done is I've actually changed the time of day so it's a little bit clearer to see everything that is inside this aircraft. I'm going to start with the EFB before I do the cockpit tour, or a full cockpit tour. I'd like to start with the EFB and just show you how you can use this EFB to actually customize your aircraft and the kind of things that are available on this EFB. So you can see that there are 3 aircraft states: ready for takeoff, ready for start, and cold and dark. Currently we are in cold and dark, but if you want to just get in this aircraft and just fly, I suppose, you can just hit ready for takeoff. The aircraft will all be started, take it up to a runway, and off you go. So that is one easy way of doing it. It also has autopilot controls over here for you, so that is useful. The one that says rear pilot actually puts a rear pilot in your rear seat, which means that you use oxygen faster, and the aircraft does have a slightly higher mass and therefore higher weight. In fact, giving an example of that, if I just click that and turn that to enabled, just watch the total weight here, total mass, total weight. £11,317 down to £11,107. So there you go. So that does have that. I'll go through the aircraft options in a moment, but first off I just want to show you some of the other options. So obviously you've got the options for the door and the nose canopy, the nose hatch and the canopy, which is this swinging door that you see here. There's your canopy. So you can open and close them. I've already closed the nose hatch, which you saw earlier on in the outside views, and the canopy I'm going to leave open for the rest of this video. Similarly, you can get rid of your equipment here, chocks, covers, flags and steps, and refill your oxygen, as well as show and hide the control sticks, like so. You can also set up your payload. So for example, in fact I'll show you the payload afterwards when I actually change this configuration out, but you can customize by clicking on here as to what you want on the payloads. Also, you can go ahead and flick that on and off by clicking this switch right here. Now this switch is usually how to contact the ground crew, so you can see that it says normal and ground crew. So you'd flick that down, that would be ground crew. Kind of makes sense because that would get rid of this. So it's a logical place to put that. Also, if we look at the aircraft options, you can fly this aircraft from both the front or rear seat. So if you press Control Rear, there you go. You're now in the rear seat, which looks a little bit different from the front. Most of it is the same, but there are some differences. And this is obviously because this is a training aircraft. So the rear pilot, who's normally an instructor, will have to be able to take control in an emergency. That being said, you can also have an engineer, flight engineer back here, which is something that they do on the Red Arrows aircraft on occasion. And once again, to move to the front, you just change that control, and there you are back at the front. Also, you can move this by clicking down here, and that will move to your lap if you just want to leave it up and do not want to get rid of it by flicking that switch over there. Quite useful, well thought out. Now, before I go back into the rest of the cockpit, or actually go into the cockpit tour should I say, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you this little bit here. So you can switch between 3 configurations for this aircraft. Currently we are in the configuration of a T1, which is just the aircraft, nothing else, no external payloads, no weapons, nothing of the sort. Pressing it again moves you over to the T1A configuration. This one has some weaponry which you cannot see because it's just hidden. Both port and starboard side, it is hidden, but I will show you one of the weapons. They are actually externally available, but you might have noticed that the aircraft is heavier now. It has payload, and also we've got all of this extra equipment over here, or extra switches for your weapons, various different weapons, your missiles, your guns, whatever it is. Now changing those out is pretty easy. All you do is just click like so. So you could get rid of all of these. So for example, I could put pylons everywhere, and if you look out to the side, there you go, that's now on a pylon. Or I could swap that out over for a launch rail, and suddenly you've got yourself a launch rail. So it's a pylon with an extra bit. And then obviously if you select various different weapons, you'll see that they show up on the actual aircraft. And similarly you can have them underneath as well. So you've got gun pod or external tanks if you wanted, and it would make the aircraft a little bit heavy. As you can see, that is now well overweight, but you are able to, if you wanted to, swap out any of these for absolutely anything you'd like. So there you go, there's another set, and that's a little bit pointy. Oh, somebody's bringing fuel, lovely. So that is how you do that. And obviously internally you saw the sights appear. We've got this unit down here which is drift and depression control for the sights, and all the weapons controls over there. You can press that again and it brings a config into the Red Arrows config. The Red Arrows config has smoke controls and the colours to select the smoke, so red, white and blue smoke on either side, and you can press them to select the colour in this particular aircraft. And also it has a GPS at the front, which personally I find a little bit annoying. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of that, and I'm going to ensure that that is off, so it's a nice clean aircraft with the Red Arrows configuration, and that is what I'm going to show you. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to start on the left hand side on the lower console, work my way all the way around and end up on the right hand side right down here at the parking brakes. So let's get rid of this, and I think that should be pretty much ready to get started and show you around this entire cockpit. Okay, so starting out on this side of the aircraft, and over here right back by the seat we have the low pressure fuel cock control valve right here, or control lever should I say, right over here. Moving forward onto the port console, I suppose you'd call this a port console, we have the engine start master switch. Then we've got the switches for the number 1 and number 2 batteries, which are in the equipment bay, the main equipment bay. We've got the fuel booster pump switch, and we have the pitot heat switch right here, the static tube heater right there, so you can flick that switch on for that. Above that we have the rudder and aileron trim switches. Alongside them we have the gauges for said switches. Then this one here is actually a tab, a guarded switch, so you can flick that up, and then you've got the tailplane trim switch right there, and that's the standby tailplane trim switch. Moving slightly further up, this one back here that it's kind of hidden by the throttles, can I just move the throttle out the way and so you can get a better look at it? That there is our friction damper, so that's our throttle damper friction controls. Twisting that actually makes the throttle a little bit more sticky in the real world, I assume, but obviously that isn't going to have much of an effect on your actual system. If, like my system, you've got something that you can turn a knob to make the throttles easier or harder to move, that's the kind of thing that this does right here. Of course, this is the throttle itself. On top of the throttle, you've got air brake controls over here, so in and out on the air brakes. That there is a push to torque with the alternative push to torque right there. That button at the back is your engine start or relight switch, and I think you hold it into relight. In fact, it does say there, relight auto hold in. There you go. This here is the lever that allows us to actually get the aircraft essentially get the throttles in a working condition. So that's basically fuel cut off, and then that is into its idle position. So just like on a jet aircraft, you tend to have these levers underneath the throttles. This one is just here to do that, and then of course your throttle will be able to move up and down. So in this position, as you can see, I cannot move the throttle. If I do that, I can move the throttle all the way up and down from maximum position all the way back down to idle, and then back into its cutoff position. This here is our anti-skid switch, so you need to flick that on to ensure that you have anti-skid. And then this one above the alternative push to torque button is our alternative receiver mute switch, so switch that into mute or normal. Above that we have our standby UHF switch, so these ones here are all radio controls, these 3, which is a bit strange. I find that having 3 radio controls on this side, whereas most of the radios on this side, is a little bit odd, but there we go. Not entirely sure what the reasoning was behind that. I do not know the designer of this particular aircraft. I do, however, know some of the design choices that were made, and this is quite nice to have the gauges over here. So we've got our pressure gauges here. So we've got hydraulic system number 1 and hydraulic system number 2. So the pressure gauges for both of those. With hydraulic system number 2, it is also the gauge that will tell you whether the ram air turbine is deployed, because the ram air turbine, the RAT, is connected to hydraulic system number 2. And if it goes below 113 bar, I believe, yes, 113 bar, it will deploy the RAT, and you will have noticed that because it will have dropped below this. And then we've got the hydraulic reset button, and also that's the RAT reset button for the system. Above that we have brake supply, a pressure gauge, and our brake pressure gauges on this side, so port and starboard brake pressures as well as our supply pressure. Next to all of that, we have our altimeter ground test switch, as well as our master ignition switch. Now it's a little bit strange. Again, I would have thought that this ignition switch for the engine would have been next to the master start switch for the engine, so you have start and ignition, but maybe it's been swapped, it's been moved like that intentionally so that you do not flick the engine start and the engine ignition in the wrong order. Perhaps that is why it's over there. And also we have the AC3, the number 3 inverter on the AC systems, the resets for that. Now the reason that is there is because the AC3 inverter is responsible, the bus bar that's connected to that is responsible for the weapons and the weapon systems. So it is separate from the other AC systems, which is used for the rest of the aircraft. And of course you would need it for the rest of the aircraft. Est of the aircraft? Rest of the aircraft. Right. Over on this side, moving up slightly, we've got our battery voltmeter right here, along with the DC generator reset button, and above those we've got the AC number 1 inverter and the AC number 2 inverter reset buttons, one after another. So that's our power resets all the way down there. Above that, this is our flap controls. So you've got up, mid and down with the flap gauge right here in increments of 10 degrees, 0, 10, 20, 30, 40 and 50 degrees. Next to the flap controls we have our gear. Yes, it is not a lever, this is a button for up and down, and alongside that we have our standby flaps lever and our standby gear lever, or UC, which is undercarriage, which is another word for landing gear. These here, which though currently red because the aircraft is off, would be green when the undercarriage is down and locked. So that is that section there. Moving up slightly, now there isn't much to show over here because we do not have the weapons controls up. So over here we have our UHF transceiver control panel, which allows us to obviously dial in UHF frequencies and mess around with whether we want to use presets, which are set on various different channels, or use it in manual mode, which allows us to dial things in like so. Above that you've got the smoke control button for the red arrows, but also if you just click over here you'll get a stopwatch come up, so you can have a stopwatch up and down on this. As I mentioned earlier, these will allow you to select the various different colors, and then just here you can click this and that brings up a frequency card. There's one on the left and one on the right, and you can tune various different frequencies into this and it will change these. As far as I know, I haven't yet tried it, but that is what it is supposed to do. Moving to the center, or the center part of this main console or cockpit. Some of these things should be familiar to people flying the older style aircraft. For those people who fly glass cockpits, you might not recognize some of these if you've never flown a traditional 6-pack on an aircraft or anything like that, but I will go through all of them and you'll realize that most of them are pretty familiar and pretty normal and standard to every aircraft. So over here we've got a G meter or an accelerometer. No, that isn't standard to every aircraft, but you would expect to use that in an aircraft like this. Underneath that, this is something that is standard in various different forms. This here is our turn and slip indicator. So you have these on Pipers and Cessnas and you see them quite often, but on a glass cockpit it would look very different to what you see here. Next to that there is a little indicator letting you know when your air brake is deployed. So I believe it lights up in white when the air brake is deployed. So we will be taking a look at that when the aircraft is switched on, just to see how that functions. Underneath that is our tailplane indicators. This tells us in degrees where our tailplane is in relation to whatever its standard setting is, and its zero pitch setting. Now, you do not tend to get that on a lot of aircraft, but there are ways to, for example, on a Boeing, I know that if you go into the systems menus on the various controls on the CDU and sorry on their what do you call it? Their computers, the flight computers, and you go into the displays and you can go into systems and then you can move around your yoke and you will see that it tells you what the position of the elevator is. That is the similar concept here, but it is always there in front of you, so you know exactly what your tailplane is doing. And in an aircraft like this, a military aircraft, that sort of thing is going to be useful. Underneath that, we have what is called a combined speed indicator. So it isn't just going to tell you what your speed is in knots, it is also going to tell you your Mach number right there. So you can see that that will go around to whatever the maximum speed of this aircraft is, which is some 600 and something knots, I believe. It's almost Mach 1, but not quite at Mach 1, which is interesting because I know that this aircraft has some of those features, especially sounds, when you break the sound barrier. So this aircraft has to be really being pushed to be able to get to that sound barrier. Underneath that, we have our directional gyro indicator. Again, these are now more standard equipment. All of these are now very standard equipment. So you've got yourself next to that your HSI, your horizontal situation indicator. Above that, you've got your attitude indicator. Next to that is your standby attitude indicator. Underneath that, you have an altimeter. Now, interestingly enough, when I first saw this, I thought this was the primary altimeter, with this being the secondary or standby altimeter. This is actually the primary, with this being the secondary. So there you go. That's something that I did not know about this aircraft. So that is your primary altimeter. Underneath that is, of course, your vertical speed indicator. Then we have a few little switches and push buttons all the way around this center part of the console. So on the left and right at the top, you see this one that has a red cover on it. That is your central warning system, the alarms and the alerter right there. So this will light up in red, it will be blinking, and there will be an audible warning, and you can press that in on either side and that will cancel the warning for you. This here, up here, just kind of hidden around this side, this is the master armament safety switch. So there you go, that's live and safe. And then next to that, we also have a switch for where our power comes from on the instruments. So whether it's normal, which I believe is the essential bus bar, or whether it's directly from the battery, depending on what the situation on your aircraft is. So if you're in a failure state and your essential bus bar is in a mess, then you've got batteries, and I think it's about 25 minutes with everything running, or that should be running on the different buses running off the battery. I think you've got about 25 minutes of battery life on those batteries. Similarly, down here you've got the same sort of thing. This is the communications power switch, whether you want that on normal or on battery. Underneath that, you've got your landing lights, or taxi lights and landing lights. Just by flicking that, you've also got yourself an ILS marker indicator light just here, and then you've got this one here, which is your this is your navigation mode selector, which switches between TACAN and, I'm not sure whether it switches between TACAN and GPS or TACAN and ILS. I think it's TACAN and ILS is what actually shows up when you press that in, like so. So that's pretty much that area. And then of course the little bit at the bottom where before we had that the depression control and the drift control, just above that we have this, which is your AHRS control, which is your attitude and heading reference system controls right there. Following on from that, we can move over slowly to the right hand side. So I've already told you that we have the standby altimeter there. Then we've got some pressurization system information here, with the oxygen flow indicator right there, the cabin altitude pressure, or pressure in altitude, so if it's at 30,000 feet, whatever the altitude pressure is supposed to be at that point, and then the amount of oxygen that you have in your tanks. Underneath that, we have 3 gauges and 2 more of these little sort of flap things that light up. This one here is your low pressure shaft rotation, I think, in the engine, and this is your gas turbine starter rotation, letting you know whether that system is active. I cannot remember if that light's been green or in white. Underneath that, we have the RPM indicator for the engine, so you can see that all the way up to 100. And then next to that, we've got our turbine gas temperature. Is it turbine gas temperature or target gas temperature? I believe in this case it's turbine gas temperature indicator there, so obviously you do not want that to be too high. I think you get some warnings if it goes towards the 700 degrees or something like that. And then quite obvious, this is our fuel gauge. Underneath that, we've got our central warning system panel. So we've got a fire extinguisher there. Do not press that unless you want to flame out your engine and you have a fire. And you've got the test switch right there, which is a guarded switch like so. Then you've got all of the warnings, which I will go through in a little while, because I want to go through some of the detail of this aircraft before I end this video. Underneath that, we've got a little bit to do with all the lighting. So you can see we've got nav lights, anti-collision lights, panel lights, emergency cockpit lighting, and the standby compass light, as well as panel lighting for the port, center and starboard sides of the aircraft. Underneath that is your CCS station box. So this is your main communication system station box right there. Below that is, and I'll show you this in a little bit more detail once the aircraft is started and we're perhaps in the air flying around, you've got your VHF transceiver control box right there. Next to that, you've got your UHF aerial select switch, which in this aircraft in Flight Simulator does a switch between nav and GPS mode. So that's GPS mode, that's nav mode, that's GPS mode, I believe. Underneath that, you've got yourself your IFF SSR control unit, which is your international friend or foe or secondary surveillance radar, as you would have in every other aircraft. And you can see there is your transponder, and then you can set your codes and everything you want right there. So you can bring it all the way up to TARA, which is going to be, you know, your full TCAS and everything like that. So that is your IFF SSR control unit. Next to that, as I said, the external intercoms unit, which in this case shows or hides our electronic flight bag. Underneath that, ADR status indicator. Now at the moment it's on fail, the aircraft is switched off. Then we've got ourselves our TACAN unit right here, so that's our TACAN control unit, which again, it's just different frequencies. You can dial in X and Y and change this frequency, and that will give you various different frequencies for you to dial in very easily, very quickly, without having to mess around with them. That is what the TACAN ones do. They're like VORs, but they are tactical military navigation only. I am not sure if TACAN works in Microsoft Flight Simulator. In fact, I don't think I've seen TACAN work in X-Plane either. I don't think I've ever had TACAN in X-Plane. I'll have to have a look. But anyway, TACAN, explaining TACAN and what TACAN is and how it differs from VORs and DMEs and all that kind of stuff, that's a story for another day. Underneath that, we have our ILS control unit. Standard, very easy to read. The only one thing to note is that it starts with the 1 right there, so you only have to mess around with these digits here. So just remember that you've already got the 1. So for example, if I was going Heathrow Airport, it would be come on, we'd go for 109.5. Yep, I think that's Heathrow Airport, one of the runways, one of the ILS runways, I think 227 right for Heathrow. And so that is how you tune it. So just remember 09.5, the 1 is already in. Next to that, we have our oxygen supply system. So that's on, that's off. You may have just heard it sounded like oxygen starting to flow. So that is how you do that. Then you've got yourselves some air conditioning systems here. So you've got your different cabin conditioning. So you've got this, whether it's normal, demist, flood, and then some of the temperature controls, which at the moment looks like it is in automatic. Then you've got an air brake test there, and the lower and lower and raise seat controls, which is supposed to be working, but for some reason I cannot get working in Microsoft Flight Simulator. But I've been having trouble with camera controls in Microsoft Flight Simulator for a long time anyway. And then of course, right at the back we have the parking brake. So that is the entire cockpit tour for this particular aircraft. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to talk a little bit about perhaps one of the systems, which is just going to be the fire system, and just to show you the amount of detail that Just Flight have put into this system and the amount of detail they've put into this actual aircraft. And obviously this is just one system of many that they've done. I mean, they've done what kind of systems are we looking at? They've got the hydraulic system. Obviously the central warning system is what I'm going to be talking about, not just the fire system. The electrical system, the fuel system, the flight controls, the landing gear, wheel brakes, anti-skid system, air conditioning system, pressurization system, oxygen system, flight information and displays, and the instrument system. All the equipment, the communication systems, the engine systems, the armaments, and obviously they've got the electronic flight bag, as well as all of the procedures. So they have put a lot of effort into this aircraft. And so I'm just going to talk about the warning system right here, just to give you a bit of an idea, because the warning system obviously will come on if other systems fail. So that would be a good way to just describe and show to you the detailing that goes into this aircraft. So let's go ahead and start with a bit of a chat about that. Getting into the central warning system. By the way, if you're wondering why I'm taking little breaks and it might look like there's cuts, it's just because of what I mentioned at the start of the video about blocked nose and a cough and all of that kind of stuff. I'm having to unfortunately cut, but it might work out a little bit better. So let's talk a little bit about the central warning system, and particularly this panel here, and why certain things would light up, just to give you an idea of the depth that Just Flight have been through. So some of these are obvious. Some of these not quite as obvious as to the situations in which they would show up. Fire. That's an obvious one. Fire means a fire in the engine bay. Now anything that's in red is obviously a massive problem, whilst everything that is in orange is a bit more amber, is something that you've got a little bit of time to work with, and there's a much higher chance of recovering. Whereas obviously anything in red, you've got a bit of a problem. So fire, obviously that is a bit of a problem. A fire in the engine bay is going to be catastrophic. You need to go ahead and press the fire extinguisher. T6NL is where the target turbine gas temperature, I keep calling it target gas temperature, the turbine gas temperature, no NL over approximately 685 degrees or 108%. So that is what T6NL means. EOHT, OHT is an overheat, E is for engine. So what this is saying is that the engine low pressure cooling air temperature has exceeded 400 degrees Celsius, so you've got yourself an engine overheat. Start, interestingly enough, doesn't mean your starter's failed. Well, in a way it does. What it means is that start, there is a fire in your air producer bay. So your GTS, your gas turbine starter, your gas turbine starter, that's it. Your GTS has got some sort of fire in that air producer bay. HYD, self-explanatory again, hydraulics, you've got yourself a total hydraulic failure. C.PR is cabin pressure. This is where your cabin altitude would exceed 30,000 feet. That warning would come on. Next to that is oxy, which is obviously oxygen. You have low oxygen pressure. Then GEN is your essential services bus bar is at 25 volts or less. So your essential services bus bar is fed by the AC system and the DC system for the battery. If you've got some problems with your batteries, if you've got some problems with the AC system and you haven't swapped things over and it drops below 25 volts, then you're going to have a generator warning right there, because the essential services bus bar, which essentially gives you the essential service. How many times can I say essential in a sentence? Yes, your main systems, things that you need to be able to fly the aircraft, are in trouble. So that's why that is a red. Hydraulics 1, hydraulics 2 is the associated system. So if your number 1 hydraulic system has reached 41 bar or less, hydraulics 1 would illuminate. If your number 2 hydraulic system has reached 113 bar or less, the hydraulic 2 system would illuminate, or that warning would illuminate. And of course your RAT would have been deployed, so whilst your RAT is deployed, your ram air turbine, that hydraulic 2 warning would remain intact, so it would stay illuminated. Fuel is quite obvious, you're low on fuel at 160 kilograms of fuel. FPR, well, just like CPR, FPR is pressure again, this time fuel, you have low fuel pressure. Then you've got AC 1, 2 and 3, something we talked about on the other side. We've got the resets for the inverters. This is telling you that the inverters are offline. So AC 1 and 2 are for your flight systems, AC 3 is for your armament system. So if you're not flying armaments and the AC 3 inverter is offline, that's not too big of a problem. But if AC 1 and AC 2 inverters are offline, that is going to be a problem because of the electrical system and the bus bars that things are connected to. You are going to be draining power, unfortunately. We also have skid and oil. Well, skid is an anti-skid, which is pretty obvious. So if your anti-skid has failed or is inoperative for some reason, you would get skid there. Oil is your engine oil differential pressure. So if that is low, you'd get the oil light on, kind of what you get in a car. If you've got low oil or low oil pressure, you get an oil light on. In fact, skid, anti-skid, I suppose that would be an ABS light in a car. And fuel would be obviously your fuel light. Fuel pressure, you wouldn't get. A lot of these would be ECU lights in a car, and these would definitely be ECU lights, or engine, just some sort of engine management light would come on. Speaking of ECU, let's move to ECA. ECA will illuminate if you have a failure of one or both of your amplifier lanes. So again, just showing the detail that they've got in this, just in the electrical system here. If your amplifier lanes fail, ECA will illuminate. Above that, you have transfer, or trans, I suppose is how you would say it if you're not adding something else, but because it's to do with transfer, not transit, so it's transfer. So you have low oil pressure in the fuel tanks. Now this is a weird one. Why does it say transfer then if it's low oil pressure in your fuel tanks? Because it's possibly a loss of fuel transfer, and that's why it illuminates with the transfer warning. And then the last one we have is JP-OHT. OHT is an overheat. JP is jet pipe. So your jet pipe bay temperature has exceeded 150 degrees Celsius. That is a jet pipe overheat, and that warning would come up. Pretty simple. And of course these would be accompanied with the illumination of these lights here. And also you'd have an audio warning. In fact, I can show you that just by kicking in the batteries. You should be able to hear it. There you go. And you can see which ones have come online. So no hydraulics, fuel transfer, fuel pressure's low, none of the generators, no anti-skid, low differential oil on the oil pressure, and your generators are showing less than 25, and that's your warning. And you can just press that and that will cancel the warning. Let's go ahead and switch that back off. Nice and simple. So I suppose in a sense, without going on far too much, because I could go on for this on this particular aircraft for another hour or so, or even 2 hours, talking about the various different systems. I hope that just gives you an idea of the depth that Just Flight have gone into on this aircraft. If the warning system is that in depth, just think about how in depth the rest of the systems are. The navigation system, the communication system, the oxygen system, the pressurization system, hydraulic system, electric system, all the rest of it, all your flight controls, flight displays, and of course the physics of this particular aircraft, which is something we will be getting into in the next video. So thank you very much for watching. Please remember to hit the like button if you like this video, subscribe to the channel for more videos, part 2 of this particular review on my channel and other videos in flight simulators. Leave a comment in the comments box below letting me know what you think. If you've purchased this aircraft, what is your opinion? Do you agree with me as to what I said before? and earlier on in this video that it is, I think, really good. It's a brilliant aircraft, having already tested it. Or do you disagree? What do you think of the price? Do you think it's worth the price? I mean, it's the same price as the version in X-Plane and in FSX and P3D, and I think this version just has a little bit more to offer than those versions, given that they've had more time to do it and they've got more ability within Microsoft Flight Simulator to do those kind of things. If you do want to purchase this aircraft, there is going to be a link in the description box below, so you can just go ahead and click there. Hopefully I remember the timestamps. If I did not, I do apologise. But if you want to support me and support this channel, you can do so by going on to Patreon. Again, that's in the description box, www.patreon.com/ecgadgets. Your support would be massively appreciated, and also you can find me on social media at ecgadgetslp for both Twitter and Instagram. That is all from me for now, and I will see you next time in Microsoft Flight Simulator, where I will start this aircraft up, take it out for a flight, a nice simple flight, get a feel for this aircraft, and then the video after, I will be putting this aircraft through its paces, just seeing how far can I push this. So make sure you stay tuned for both of those.